Have you ever been upset with God? You ever been angry at Him for letting something happen to you that you really just feel like it shouldn't have happened? Like maybe you had some kind of injury or sickness that just changed your life, and you just, God, why are you letting this happen to me? Why are you letting my life change so drastically? Or maybe you have some kind of loss, lost a child or a spouse, lost something that's very important to you. God, where are you in all this wickedness, all this evil, and all these bad things that are happening? You see the drug abuse around us. You see human trafficking, and you see all of the wickedness and evil in the world. And you see all these bad things happening to good people, and you just wonder, God, where are you? Now, how do you pray when you're in a place like that? How do you approach God when He doesn't seem to notice or even to care? God, I see all this evil, but there's no answer. Why are you this way? Why do you let these things happen? Thankfully, there are some people in the Bible who give us an answer. We've been studying this series on the characters of the Old Testament, the faulty heroes who have a fixed faith. We've seen Abraham and Joseph and Moses and Samson and David, and we've walked through that period of history where God called the people for Himself. They ended up in slavery in Egypt, and then God set them free and let them out. And He set them up with these judges who were constantly fighting their battles for them, but they got tired of that and they wanted to have a king instead, a king like the nations. And so we're seeing this period where the kings of Israel have these same kinds of cycles as the judges, where good things happen and then bad things happen. And they're constantly struggling with idolatry. And so what God does is He sends these prophets to come and confront them. You're struggling with idolatry and injustice. They're having these problems where they're taking land from the widows, where they're leaving orphans in the street. It even got so bad they were burning their babies in the fire. And it was obvious that they had no love for God. You know, the great commandment: love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, strength, and soul, and love your neighbor as yourself. Well, they did not have a love for God or for each other, and so they abused each other, and they were constantly taking advantage of one another. And it actually says that every generation did worse than their fathers before them. Everyone did more evil than their fathers before them. So it was just this continual, this progressive descent into wickedness. And God promised them, if you keep going like this, you're going to be exiled. You're going to be driven out of the land. And it's at this time that we find this story about a prophet named Habakkuk. He was near the end. And most prophets, their job was to speak God's word to the people. But Habakkuk's story is a little bit different because he doesn't address the people. Instead, he addresses God Himself. And he sees this wickedness. And so he has these two complaints. The first one is, are you there? His first question to God is, God, are you there? And the second one is, how can you allow and even use evil? And so what we see in Habakkuk is this struggle to reconcile God's goodness with all of the evil going on around him. And I guess that's what I want to ask you. Have you been there? Have you been at that situation where you want to point your finger at God and say, where are you? Have you ever felt so overwhelmed that you say, God, what's going on? Things seem so bad that they can't be fixed. Well, Habakkuk had that same feeling. And I want to look at his story and at his complaints and God's answers to him to see how we can find help for ourselves when things seem this way. His first complaint is in chapter 1, verse 2. And his question is, are you there? Habakkuk chapter 1, verse 2. He says, O Lord, how long shall I cry for help, and you will not hear? Or cry to you, violence, and you will not save? Why do you make me see iniquity, and why do you idly look at wrong? Destruction and violence are before me. Strife and contention arise. So the law is paralyzed, and justice never goes forth. For the wicked surround the righteous, so justice goes forth perverted. So he makes these three observations. The first one is, everywhere I look, I see violence and destruction. They are before me, and strife and contentions arise. Everywhere I look, somebody is hurting someone else. Everywhere I look, something bad is happening. So, his second observation, the law is paralyzed and justice never goes forth. You've given us your commandments. Moses went up on Sinai and he got those commandments and he brought them back down. And we have been struggling with this through all the times of the judges, through all the times of the kings. Now we're here in my time, and it doesn't seem like it's any better. The law is paralyzed and justice never goes forth, for the wicked surround the righteous. There are more of them than there are of us. So justice goes forth perverted. There are more wicked than there are people who love you and your word and love each other. And so I just have to wonder these three questions. God, don't you hear? How long shall I cry for help and you will not hear? Don't you hear what's going on? How long am I going to cry to you violence and you don't save? Don't you save? Why do you idly look at wrong? Don't you care? Those are his three questions. Don't you hear? Don't you save? And don't you care? Well, you might think that God would strike Habakkuk down for asking questions like that, but instead, God is very patient and he gives him an answer. And that answer is found in verses 5 through 11. We're going to look at verse 6. His answer is simply, I have a plan. Behold, Habakkuk chapter 1, verse 6, I am raising up the Chaldeans, that bitter and hasty nation, who march through the breadth of the earth to seize dwellings not their own. So Habakkuk asks this question, and it turns out God does have an answer. He is aware. He does care very deeply, and he has a plan for it. He is sending the Chaldeans. Now, you might know them better as the Babylonians, and it's definitely not good. The Babylonians are very symbolic of the enemies of God's people. And he says they're dreaded and fearsome. And he explains in those verses there, in verses 5 through 11, why they're so dreaded. First of all, they make their own rules. There in verse 7, he says their justice and dignity go forth from themselves. They get to decide what they think is right and wrong, and then they're going to act towards you according to that way. In verse 8, he says their horses are swifter than leopards, more fierce than the evening wolves. Their horsemen press proudly on. They fly like an eagle swift to devour. And so you got these three animals, horses like leopards and wolves. The men on them are like eagles swooping down to eat their prey. You've seen an eagle swoop down and pick up a rabbit. And that's how these people are. They're just efficient and ruthless and cunning. In verse 9 it says they all come for violence and they gather captives like sand. And when they come, they scoff at kings, they laugh at fortresses, and they worship their own strength. They are so powerful that nothing can stand in their way, and God is sending them to Israel to seize dwellings not their own. Now you can imagine Habakkuk when he hears this. That's probably not the answer he was looking for. In my mind, I imagine him pulling out his hair and tearing his clothes, and he's just so stunned. God, how can this be possible? Look at chapter 1, verse 13. You who are of purer eyes than to see evil and cannot look at wrong, why do you idly look at traitors and remain silent when the wicked swallows up the man more righteous than he? God, you're so pure. You can't even look at evil. How is it that you could take someone who is so wicked and use them? That's his second complaint. How can you allow and even use evil? You have made mankind like the fish of the sea. And Babylon brings all of them up with a hook. He drags them out with his net. He gathers them in his drag net. And so he rejoices and is glad. Therefore he makes sacrifices and offerings to his net and his drag net. For by them he lives in luxury and his food is rich. Is he then to keep on emptying his net and mercilessly killing nations forever? He sees God's answer here, and God, how can you allow this? Babylon's worse than us. They treat people like animals, and they are merciless killers. It's like everybody in the world is like a fish, and Babylon is this hunter or this fisherman who comes after them, and constantly he drags them up with his hook, and he gets rich off of everything that he takes from them. And so, because of that, he worships his own strength. He makes sacrifices and offerings to the things that get him this wealth. Are you going to keep on letting him do this, mercilessly killing nations forever? It's like I've asked for healing, like I have cancer, and God, I need you to heal me. And you say, okay, first I'm going to break both your legs. I don't understand this. How can such a holy God use something that just seems so backwards? I imagine that was a question that they had a lot in Israelite history. It's definitely a question we've had a lot in our time. God, how can you use somebody like Pharaoh? How can you use something like cancer? Or how can something good come from a recession? I just don't see how these things are acceptable if you're so pure and so holy and so good. And he's stuck with that question. He doesn't really know what the answer is going to be, but he ends that complaint with a resolution. In chapter 2, verse 1, he says, I will take my stand at my watchpost and station myself on the tower and look out to see what he will say to me and what I will answer concerning my complaint. I don't know what you're going to say to this because it doesn't seem like there's a good answer, but I'm just going to stop and I'm going to wait and listen for you. And that's when God comes along in chapter 2, verse 2, with his second answer. And it's basically, my justice will prevail. Look at verse 2. And the Lord answered me, write the vision, make it plain on tablets, so he may run who reads it. For still the vision awaits its appointed time. It hastens to the end. It will not lie. If it seems slow, wait for it. It will surely come. It will not delay. Behold, his soul is puffed up. It is not upright within him. But the righteous shall live by his faith. So what he says here is, I want you to go ahead and write on stone tablets my answer. And that's important. I want you to make it plain, and I want you to know that it's going to come. This is an unchanging promise, and it will give you assurance. It's going to be written in stone. If you need to leave, when you come back and you look at this promise, it's still going to be there. It's not going to change. And the promise is this: the proud will be judged, and the righteous will live by his faith in this hope. God's justice will prevail. And what he does in this chapter is he gives these four woes against Babylon, these four sorrows, if you will. Habakkuk's saying, God, I don't know how you're going to deal with this. How can a just God do what he does? How can you do what you do and use evil men like this? And his answer is, my justice is going to prevail against their unjust gain. In verses 6 and 9, he says that. Woe to him who heaps up what is not his own, and woe to him who gets evil gain for his house. See, what's going to happen is their debtors will suddenly arise, and their wealth will be plundered, and their life will be forfeit. You're building your house up this way. You're gaining it. You're like a fisherman setting your hooks, and you're mercilessly killing all the nations. Well, guess what? It's going to come your time pretty soon. Woe to him who heaps up what is not his own, and to him who gets evil gain for his house. Also, in verse 12, woe to him who builds a town with blood and founds a city on iniquity. So here he's railing against their murder and their corruption. They think that they can force their way into glory. And his answer to them is that their glory will be eclipsed by God's. Look at verse 14. For the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. So they are doing everything they do for their own glory, for their own honor. And God says, woe to you who do that, because your glory is not going to amount to very much whenever I do what I do. I'm going to pour out my justice on you, and you're going to pay for the things that you've done. God's glory is going to cover the world like the waters cover the sea. He also says in verse 15, woe to him who makes his neighbors drink in order to gaze at their nakedness. This is a woe against their disgraceful treatment of their neighbors. This is them. It's not really a sexual thing so much as it is an issue of shame, uncovering their nakedness. And he says, that's what you want to get your neighbors drunk so that you can do that. Instead, verse 16, you will have your fill of shame instead of glory. You're going to drink and you're going to show your uncircumcision. You're going to show that you don't belong to God at all. You're not his people, and that you don't share in the covenants, the promises. And so those who go around treating their neighbors so disgracefully, God's justice, his judgment is going to be poured out. It's going to be fulfilled. And they will instead be the ones who have shame. So the debtors will rise against them. Their lives will be plundered and forfeited. Their glory will be eclipsed by God's glory, and their glory will be turned to shame. And then finally, verse 19, he says, woe to him who says to a wooden thing, awake. This is his judgment against foolish worship of idols. He says, instead, what's going to happen is you're going to be silenced. Because, verse 20, the Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth keep silence before him. Habakkuk, you don't need to worry. I see all the things that are happening. That's the bigger message here. The eyes of the Lord are in every place, beholding the evil and the good. He sees, He cares, and He has a plan. His justice is coming, and you can write that down. That gives hope. That gives hope to the righteous because they can live by faith in God's promise that those wicked people will be judged and those righteous people will live. But Habakkuk, he seems a little stunned by this answer. He kind of has a hard time accepting it, and that's where we start in chapter 3. In verse 2, he begins to pray this prayer to God. And I encourage you to read really the whole book, but I encourage you to read the prayer and just see what he prays to God. Where is his heart when he realizes God's justice will come? Well, in verse 2, Habakkuk chapter 3, verse 2, he says, O Lord, I have heard the report of you, and your work, O Lord, do I fear. I have heard about the things you've done in the past. I've heard about the Exodus, all the plagues and the Passover. I heard about the Red Sea. I've heard about the walls of Jericho. I've heard about all those things that you've done through the judges and through the kings and through these prophets and miracles. I've heard about all of it, and I fear your work. Now, I'm asking you to revive it. In the midst of the years, make it known. In wrath, remember mercy. Revive your name in Israel again. Revive your work. Make your work known again in Israel. Save us again. Fulfill these woes and bring sorrow on these people who are so wicked, and defeat evil and deliver justice and rescue the oppressed. God, in all of this, in all of your wrath, remember your mercy, because there are people who believe. Look at chapter 3, verse 16. He goes from praying this prayer to offering this praise. God, I want to see your work done. I want to see you remember mercy in your wrath. Because, verse 16, I hear what you've just said to me. I hear the Chaldeans are on their way. My body trembles. My lips quiver at the sound. Rottenness enters into my bones, and my legs tremble beneath me. This cannot be good. A time is coming when all of these homes that I see, they're going to be burned down. The walls that surround your city are going to be torn apart. There's going to be blood in the streets. My friends, my family, people I know and love, they're going to die. They're going to suffer. Yet, I will quietly wait for the day of trouble to come upon people who invade us. Though the fig tree should not blossom, nor fruit be on the vines, the produce of the olive fail, and the fields yield no food, the flock be cut off from the fold, and there be no herd in the stalls, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will take joy in the God of my salvation. God, the Lord, is my strength. He makes my feet like the deer's. He makes me tread upon high places. You know what this is? This is an example of living by faith. You know what he's saying is, even if the world falls apart, I'm going to trust you. Even if there's no food to eat and there's no hope of food in the future, the trees are empty and the stables and the stalls are empty too, I choose to trust you. I choose to find joy in your promises that the righteous will live by faith. The righteousness that comes from belief is just shining from Habakkuk when he prays this prayer, when he offers this praise. I choose to trust you because I realize, God, you love this world more than I do, and one day you will deal with its evil. And by praying this prayer and writing it down so that we can read it, he invites us to join him on that journey. So my question, I suppose, is how do we do it? How do we join Habakkuk on this journey of believing God? Well, the first thing is you have to walk in faith. I love the fact that he says that. Write it down. You can count on this. You can come back to this later and you will find it unchanged. And what he has said is that anyone who comes to me won't be turned away, and anyone who comes to me won't be put to shame. Have you believed that promise? It's not just an intellectual thing where you just say, well, yeah, I believe in Jesus. Look, Satan, the demons, they believe in the same God and they shudder. I'm asking you, have you made a conscientious decision to follow him. Have you done like what the disciples did? Jesus came to them and he said, "Follow me." And they just got up and they followed him. He said, "Come on, let me show you where we're going to go." And they dropped their nets. They dropped everything that they had and they just left all of it behind. That's what the Bible says that we have to do. We have to take up our cross. We have to follow him. We have to leave behind all of our family, all of our wealth, all of our desires, all of our self, all of everything, and follow him. Habakkuk was doing that. He said, "I'm going to wait in the watchtower. I'm going to wait and see. Have you come to him and have you said, 'You're the Lord, and I'm going to give up everything to follow you'?" That's where you start. You start there. But that's not where you end. As believers, we have to continue to trust his promises. And there are so many that are written down. He says, "I will never leave you or forsake you." He says, "I'm going to provide all of your basic needs. I know just what you need for food and clothing and drink, and I know everything." He says, "I'm going to bring justice to the earth. I'm going to end oppression. I'm going to establish my own kingdom on the earth. I will deliver you from sin and death. I will take you home to be with me, and I will wipe away every tear, and I will be your God, and you'll be my people." But what I want you to realize is that he doesn't say when. We have no idea how long this is going to take. But wait for it. Write it down and wait for it. And what you can do in doing this, it's kind of like Habakkuk said, I've heard of the things that you've done before. So we're just going to focus on the things that God has done for other people throughout the scriptures, for other people that we know in history, for us personally in our past. How has God worked in your past? What has God done for you that you can lean on that and say, "You know what? There's no blossom on the fig tree, but I know that he's faithful because he's always been there. I've never gone hungry. So I'm going to be silent and I'm going to listen. I'm going to wait. God, answer my prayer." This is how you walk in faith, is you just trust him and follow his promises. The second thing that we can do is we've got to learn to see God's judgment as an opportunity for repentance and obedience. Remember, the Lord has made everything for its purpose, even the wicked for the day of trouble. He also says, "Behold, I have refined you, but not as silver. I have tried you in the furnace of affliction." It's good for us because God sees everything that's happened. He knows everything that's happened. He's made everything for its purpose, even the wicked for the day of trouble. And he has promised that all of it works together for our good. It's like we're like gold. He puts us in the furnace of affliction to melt away all of the dross so that we're purified through that. And that's how God does it often. He delivers us in and through pain. That was the whole purpose of the exile. This didn't, when the Babylonians came, they took the Israelites out of the area and they moved them over to Babylon. But it was for their good. They didn't struggle with idolatry like they did before once they got back. And think about the times that you've been humbled. How have you been shaped through pain? I think about some of the things I've talked about before, like my neck surgery was such an important part of my life. It was one of the best things for my spiritual maturity because I was so humbled. I was so forced to wait on him. God used that suffering and that pain to bring me to a place where I was more obedient than before. Think about Jesus on the cross and all the good that came from his suffering, from God's judgment being poured out on him. Listen to this. Paul says this in 2 Corinthians. "Though our outer self is wasting away, our inner self is being renewed day by day." This life that we live, everything you can see on the outside, it's all wasting away. But our inner self, God is using these hard things to shape us and change our inner self. It's being renewed day by day. And listen to what he says. "For this light momentary affliction is preparing for us an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison." So go ahead. Stand at your watch post and make your complaints. Pray to God and wait for an answer. Stand there on behalf of others. We've got opportunities for this in our church where we're going to have prayer nights, where we're going to go to people's houses and we're going to pray for God's provision in the fall, God's wisdom. God, what do you want us to do this fall as a church? as a community. We've got nights of prayer coming up every night, every once a week in September, where we're going to pray at the new church building so that we can go in there and we can ask God, but God bless us and give us wisdom and understanding so that we know how to use this to equip the saints to engage the community. We've got prayer quads. We've got so many opportunities where you can meet with other people and pray for all kinds of things in your lives. Stand at your watch post and go ahead and make your complaints. Join those saints who have gone before us. Ask your questions and express your doubts. You say, God, where are you in this situation? Why don't you act? When are you going to act? And I know some of you are going to say, well, is that really okay? I mean, the Israelites complained to God and it didn't go very well for them. But I want you to make this distinction. I want you to notice this difference. It's not the same thing to complain to God as it is to grumble at God. The Israelites grumbled at him. Habakkuk complained to him. His question was authentic. It's human to wonder, God, where are you? It's human and natural to say, God, I don't understand, and I just want to understand. I mean, if you say we can't ever question, we can't ever wonder, it's like saying you can't ever get angry, or you can't ever love, or you can't ever cry. This is a human experience. What matters is the posture of your heart. Israel wanted to be enslaved. God, we're just sick of following you. We want to go back to where we were. They used God selfishly. But Habakkuk, he looked around and he said, God, I'm really struggling with all this injustice and all this unrighteousness, and I'm asking you for confirmation. I'm asking you to give me some kind of reminder what is going on. And you know what? God was patient and gracious. He answered Habakkuk without rebuke. Did you notice that? He didn't get mad. It wasn't like with Job. You know, Job was saying, God, what right do you have to do this to me? And God said, you stand up and answer me like a man. I'm going to ask you questions and you're going to find out who you really are. He didn't do that with Habakkuk, though. Habakkuk, I do know what's going on, and I've got a plan. Don't you worry about it. I'm committed to justice, and you will live by faith in me. And so really what God does is he reaffirms Habakkuk's faith. He wanted him to ask, and he wants you to ask. He wants to lead you with his answers into confidence. Listen, though the world falls apart, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will take joy in the God of my salvation. Let God be your strength today.